In this video, I'm going to explain how your digestion is the key to gaining weight. And if you do this right, with the knowledge I'm going to share with you today, you can gain at least 10 to 20 pounds of lean mass in the next 8 to 12 weeks and finally transform your body. Now, this video is going to be extremely useful for you. If you're a skinny guy who struggles to gain weight, maybe you feel like no matter how much you eat, the scale just doesn't budge, and you're looking in the mirror and you still see the same body and you don't want to be that skinny guy forever. What I'm going to tell you works even if you've never managed to gain or keep on any weight ever before. And I'm going to tell you the 3 most common mistakes that hold skinny guys back as they try and gain weight, and how you can avoid them to make better progress faster than you ever thought possible and easily keep the results with minimal effort. Now, what I'm going to explain here is something that you've probably never heard before. So forget whatever you think you know about gut health and digestion and probiotics and supplements and the parasite cleanses and whatever you see out there. So let's get into it. Now, before we get into the meat of the video, I'm going to quickly show you proof that this works so effectively. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just a few seconds here. What I'm showing you here is some results such as gaining 24 pounds in a few months. You can see some also physique transformations here. And this client, he even gained 20 pounds and he grew taller. He grew 1.5 inches in height. So these are results from clients that have been skinny their entire lives, struggling to gain and keep on any weight. But when they apply what you're going to learn in this video in the next few minutes, they actually fill out their clothes better than ever. They finally can gain this weight. And you can imagine the confidence boost that comes with that. This is really the closest thing to a cheat code for skinny guys to gain lean mass. And the last thing I'll say on results before we proceed with the rest of the video, when you gain healthy weight by getting to the root cause, which is the digestion, you can also fix a ton of other problems. For example, things like hair loss improves. You increase your energy levels. You even fix skin issues. Skinny guys are typically much more prone to these kinds of issues, especially not being able to get control of hair loss and having skin conditions. So once you fix your digestion, you start to gain weight, you'll start to see these other issues clearing up as well. So before we get into the rest of the video, if you want to get results like this and more, then you can check out the link in the description to learn more about my program for hard gainers to gain 10 to 20 pounds of lean mass guaranteed. So now let's get into it. First thing that you want to understand is that your digestion is your main mechanism, your main system for building mass and repairing tissue. So digestion is that biological process where you break down food into usable materials, right? The building blocks that your body needs to grow. And the primary reason you cannot gain any weight is because your digestion is very weak. It's compromised. And I'm going to explain why your digestion is compromised in a moment. Now, because you have this weak and compromised digestion, that's why it doesn't matter how much food that you eat, because if your digestion isn't working properly, you're not absorbing any of the nutrients from the food. You're not actually turning that food into utilizable building blocks to grow your body. That's why skinny guys struggle. It's in the digestion. Now, why is your digestion compromised? What causes a weak digestion? There's 4 key points I want to go through. All 4 of these are very interesting. They offer an answer to why people have poor health today in many ways. And this is partly why we see an increase in some health problems over the past generations. For example, today you see more and more narrow jaws, people with crowded, goofy teeth. Aspects of human health are progressively getting worse with each generation. And these 4 reasons can answer why this is happening. Now, the 4th point is especially overlooked. So the first point I want to explain is industrial toxins. These are the chemicals, the heavy metals, the plastics, the pesticides, the pollutants in the food, water, and air. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, which started around the 1700s, as we modernized our lifestyles, we increased our exposure to these industrial toxins. Mercury from coal, aluminum from processed foods and cookware, formaldehyde from building materials, industrial solvents in manufacturing, and countless other examples. We breathe these industrial toxins, we drink them, we eat them, we absorb them through our skin. And these toxins are literally everywhere. Today, it's impossible not to be affected by them. Now, how do these toxins affect your digestion? So as you're exposed to these toxins, some of them start to accumulate inside of your body, and many of them store in your gut. The stomach lining and the intestinal lining, for example, the intestinal walls, they get overloaded with these industrial toxins like the heavy metals. It's really like a sponge. It really absorbs these toxins. This partly explains why skinny guys often feel nauseous or tired or even brain fog after they eat. The villi in your intestines, which are those tiny finger-like structures that are responsible for nutrient absorption, they also get damaged. They can even shrink in size as you get older. Now, all of these things that I just explained compromise your ability to digest every single food that you eat. The second point I want to tell you about is that some of these toxins actually come from your mother. Before you are even born, while you're a fetus, you can call this prenatal poisoning. Today, there are many studies showing this, for example, with heavy metals. And since these days, no one is really healthy, including your parents, from the exposure to those industrial toxins I explained earlier, from the heavy metals, from the medications, from the chemicals, these toxins get into the bloodstream of your mother and they accumulated in you when you're a little fetus. Now, you may notice if you look around you, some people just seem to be weaker, less healthy than others, and this partly explains why. Now, don't be angry at your mother. That's not what this is about, but this is just the reality of the situation. The third cause of your weak digestion is actually from eating cooked foods. So here's what happens for most people. When they're born, they get breast milk from the mother, which is actually a raw food. But after that initial breast milk for 1 or 2 years, they spend the rest of their life eating mostly or even entirely cooked foods. What happens when you cook, especially at high temperatures, is that it alters the chemical structure of the food, it denatures the proteins, it's altering the fats, it cauterizes the minerals, like calcium, for example, that becomes difficult to utilize when it's heated. Now, what cauterizing means is that these minerals become hardened. And you can imagine if they become hardened, it's almost like glass shards passing through your intestines. And this is going to damage your gut as well. One example that's simple for most people to understand is with pasteurized milk. When you pasteurize, which means to heat the milk aggressively, you lose stem cells, which are present in raw milk, for example, and you cauterize those minerals like calcium. You lose nutrients like vitamin D, you damage the vitamin C, and you lose the enzymes and the bacteria. And you go from having a very nice, healthy, nutritious food in the form of raw milk to a food that just doesn't improve your health, which is pasteurized dairy. People today seem to understand this with the growing trend of raw milk, and they understand that pasteurized milk, you lose a lot when you pasteurize. But here's the thing, that same process and the damaging that happens during pasteurization happens to all the other foods that you eat when you cook them, including steak, for example. When you heat, you alter those molecules and they cannot be properly broken down by the body's enzymes and bacteria. Now, that's why most people are actually nutritionally starved. Even in the developed world, people are actually malnourished, even if they're eating a lot of food. Something else to consider when you're cooking, it's not just that you lose a lot of nutrients, but you also create carcinogenic compounds, such as acrylamides, HCAs, and lipid peroxides. And these compounds, many of them are carcinogenic, and they can compromise your ability to digest. They damage the stomach lining, the intestinal lining, they damage the protective mucus layer in your gut. This impacts your intestinal villi, and it will damage your ability to absorb nutrients from the food, leaving you with a compromised digestion. Now, the fourth point I want to explain, and this is my favorite of the 4 points, is that there's actually a kind of bacteria deficiency in society. Now, what are actually bacteria? You can think about bacteria in a very simple, easy way to understand as those little helpers in your gut that digest the food for you. But if you lack bacteria, you will have a compromised digestion. And in our society today, from medications such as antibiotics, antibacterial soaps, chlorine in swimming pools, and all of this obsession with sanitization and cleaning everything, we actually destroy so much of our bacteria. For example, just look around in our society today. It's quite funny to bring your attention to the animal kingdom. If you look at the animal kingdom, there is no concept of bacteria, there is no sanitization. Or when I do research with tribes, for example, I was recently with a tribe in Africa, they have no concept of bacteria. Now, that doesn't mean that they're dirty. They do remove dirt and mud, and even animals, they also remove dirt and mud. But they do not kill bacteria. They do not sanitize things. It's only in the so-called developed world that we do that. And then there's also the bacteria or the lack of bacteria in the food that we eat. Since we're eating mostly cooked foods, when you heat food at high temperature, you destroy a lot of the bacteria. Again, you can compare this to the entire animal kingdom, every other species on the planet. Everything is eaten raw, full of bacteria. Even some animals eating rotten foods full of bacteria. For example, crocodiles, they actually bury some of their prey under the water to let it ferment and to break down even further so it's nice and soft and easy to digest. Now, I'm not saying you need to do that, although it can actually help you, funnily enough. But it's just an interesting contrast to look at what we're doing, everything cooked, versus the entire animal kingdom, everything raw. And you look at the entire animal kingdom, healthy wild animals are not having those jaw problems that we're having. They're not having those crowded, goofy teeth. But that's a topic for another video. As a result of this sanitization in our lives and eating food which has been pasteurized and lacks bacteria, not only is that food harder to digest, but this also compromises our digestion by destroying the bacteria that we have in our gut. So now you've become aware of the 4 key points I've explained, probably for the first time in your life. This explains partly why you're in the situation that you're in. You probably didn't know any better before, but now through this awareness that I've given you in this video, you have a real opportunity to improve your life. You can remove these poisons from your organs and from your intestines, and you can rebuild your body. Now, do you see how everything from skin issues and hair loss can be directly related to your digestion? Nutrients are the building blocks for hair growth. So if you don't digest properly, then your main mechanism for growing hair, for example, is dysfunctional. It doesn't work properly. In my experience with hundreds of skinny guys, they have a much harder time with things like hair loss and skin issues. And they typically have much lower energy levels. Now, if you're skinny and you do not fix your digestion, you're really setting yourself up for a lifetime of feeling weak, having lower energy, and potentially much worse problems down the line, which I'll explain more about in this video. So now let's get into the starting points for how to improve your situation, how to solve the problem of your digestion. And so I'm going to give you the roadmap to gain weight without having to do any kind of force feeding or dirty bulking. I'm going to break it down into 3 parts so that it's easy to understand and start implementing. So the first part of this is that you want to remove the toxins from your everyday environment, but also the foods that you're eating. What does it actually mean? So you want to change aspects of your lifestyle to avoid the chemicals, to avoid heavy metals and things like mold. You want to look at your home, where you live, where you sleep, for example, where you spend most of your time. You want to look at everything that you put on your skin, all of the products that you're using, even the clothes that you're using, the materials of of the sofas and the chairs that you're sitting on most of the time, and everything that you're putting inside your body as well. You can go through each room in your home, for example, and see what's a source of chemicals, of plastics, of heavy metals. You don't need to be neurotic about it, but these are all factors to consider if you actually want to rebuild your body and become healthy and live a long and healthy life. For example, I used to live in the center of London on the 3rd floor, and I used to have my open window on a busy street, you know. Now, I wasn't aware of it at the time. This was almost 10 years ago, but the amount of chemicals I must have been breathing in through all those cars that were passing by and stopping at the traffic lights and things like that would be extremely damaging. So what you want to do is make your life, your day-to-day life, as low toxin as possible so you're not constantly damaging your body. And like I said, the main things that you want to look for are heavy metals and chemicals. Those are typically the main sources of problems for people in their home and in the foods that they're eating. So that's the first step. The second step, and this is really the key, is that you want to remove the toxins that are already inside your body. So this is what you call detoxification, the process of removing these toxins. So there are many ways to remove heavy metals and chemicals. For example, you can use specific food combinations which act as solvents, meaning they help to dissolve waste and toxins inside of your body. You can use things like sweating in the form of hot baths, not saunas, by the way. That's a topic for a different video. The most important is really the baseline diet that you follow, which is what we're going to get onto in the third point, because you want to have high nutrient intake and which is also going to help you to remove these poisons from your body. But to give you guys a specific example of a detox protocol, one of the most important to use is binders. These are especially important for skinny guys who are struggling to gain weight. Now, in some skinny guy case studies that I've worked with, these were one of the biggest game changers. Okay, it's definitely not the only thing, and there's many ways to remove these toxins from your body, but this is just one of the most important and something that I can give you in this video. What are binders? Binders are substances that you eat, but you don't actually digest. They're like a vacuum that passes through you like a sponge, pulling out these industrial toxins, things like heavy metals and chemicals from your intestines and allowing you to safely excrete them without those toxins being reabsorbed back into your bloodstream. Now, I'm going to give you an example of what binder to use in a moment. So the key time to have these binders is firstly when you wake up in the morning and every time before you eat a meal. You can think of these binders like a digestive supplement with your meal. Now, I'm not suggesting to use any supplements, by the way. I'm also going to talk about that in a second. So if you have these binders every time before you eat, for example, it will allow you to actually take more nutrients from the foods that you're eating, and then you can notice, wow, I'm finally starting to gain weight for the first time in my life. What kind of binders do I recommend? I do not suggest using any synthetic supplements, including binder supplements. And one of the reasons for this is because supplements are processed in factories and they're always using chemicals and heat. And so, as we just discovered, they always contain toxins themselves, every single supplement. And so you do not want to be using that. So what is the best binder? It's actually a specific type of cheese. Now, this might sound crazy if you haven't actually experienced it for yourself, but cheese, specifically unsalted raw cheese, is a crucial food for fixing your digestion. And using this unsalted raw cheese was actually discovered by a biochemist called Arjuna's Wonder Planets. In a moment, I'll get on to telling you a bit more information about how you can source this item. But first, I want to give you another example of how effective this is. Even if you have things like food poisoning, the cheese is extremely effective. It can clear up food poisoning really, really fast in a matter of minutes or hours. I was actually testing this with some of my friends in Cape Town. They were getting food poisoning following, their normie type of diet. And they were calling in the doctors, IV drips, antibiotic prescriptions. The doctor was saying, I think you have parasites, and doing stool tests and all these things. And my friend said, hey, what would you do if you were me? And I said, well, for the purpose of YouTube, this isn't medical advice. I said, hey, why don't you try this? You can try eating this unsalted raw cheese and you should see that your symptoms can improve really fast. And by the end of the trip, my friend was raving about this cheese, having it every time he drank alcohol and just telling loads of people about it, saying this was improving his digestion. He was also actually a bit on the skinny side as well, so he really needed it. But like I said, I don't want to make this whole video about cheese. Cheese is really one piece of the puzzle. And the thing with this specific unsalted raw cheese, it's not something that you can just buy on Amazon, or you cannot just order it on DoorDash or Uber Eats. In the world that we live in, it's not necessarily easy to source high quality foods, right? You have to put in some extra effort in order to get the benefits of enhanced health. So this cheese specifically, there's niche producers in each part of the world. With all of my clients, what I do, because it's not easy to source foods, we actually provide a food sourcing service, almost like a concierge. And I have a team that verifies food sources. They call them, they email them to check how they're manufacturing the food, make sure there's no contamination, make sure that they're not heating the food, even when they say it's raw, for example. Those labels today, they're really distorted the meaning of those labels. So you cannot just rely on the label. You actually have to understand and talk to the producer of the food. And obviously this is a lot of effort. That's why I have a team that does this. And that's something that I offer to all of my clients. Let's get into the third point now, which is building your body with the baseline diet, the foods that you're eating on a daily basis. And so what I'm going to do here is give you some general nutrition tips for weight gain. So let's get straight into that. What I suggest for most people watching this video, just to give you general advice, right? This is not personalized to you individually. This is just general advice for everyone watching. What I recommend to people is a combination of raw and cooked foods to start with. Now, mostly raw as you're comfortable with. And I don't mean raw vegan, by the way, because that's going to leave you skinny and decimated, but actually raw, high-fat, primal, or animal-based type of diet. Now, you could jump straight into completely raw, but you would need to know what you're doing with that, not to make any mistakes. And you want to have really high quality foods, especially with the animal sources of the foods. And you need to really know exactly what you're doing. And the reason I say that you can jump straight into raw is because raw is really the best. And if you do it right, that's a big disclaimer, a big caveat, you will feel incredible doing that. That's what I've been doing now for 5 years myself, but you have to do it correctly. Okay. There's so many mistakes that people make. So if you don't know what you're doing, you can start with some raw, cooking the meat less, for example, and just in general, try and be aware of eating more raw foods, okay? And the reason raw is superior for building your body is because the nutrients are not damaged through heat, and there are none of those toxins that are created when you heat the food. You notice how raw food, for example, is colorful, and then everything becomes gray when you cook. That gray color is really symbolic of what it's doing to the nutrients and the enzymes and the bacteria in the food, right? So the gray symbolizes decay. So raw is generally easier to digest and it doesn't contain those toxins. You can think about it like that. Now, the most important foods after those binders that I was talking about is a source of raw animal fats and a source of meat for the protein. Now, this meat should be high quality and what the animal was being fed must have been avoiding medications, and the meat must have been never frozen. It's very important. I've been eating raw for 5 years now, and I never eat frozen meat. I strongly suggest avoiding it. It does not really build your body in the same way. So fresh raw foods are also superior because they contain a lot of enzymes. Now, enzymes is going to actually help you to increase your appetite, which can be helpful. It has to be enzymes from food. If you just eat enzyme supplements, you will not get that same benefit. So these foods are the most dense in nutrients, which will allow you to gain weight without eating huge volume of foods, okay? It's a very common mistake that skinny guys start to eat huge meals, for example. They start to eat tons of rice and bread and pasta, but they're eating so much volume, but there's actually very little nutrients there. So they struggle to gain weight. Maybe they gain a little bit of weight, but then they lose it all very fast. In my experience, those carbs don't help to build your body in a long-lasting way. They can even make your health worse. For example, they're very dehydrating. So you don't want to be eating too many carbohydrates, right? You want to build your body with the fats and the proteins and the minerals. That's the key. So with that roadmap that I just gave you, if you do this correctly and you stay consistent, you can start to gain a lot of weight. But here's the thing. There are some common roadblocks that will probably get in the way for most people. The first roadblock, for example, from stress and people not really knowing what they want and jumping from thing to thing, people really struggle to figure out, one, exactly what they want, but also struggle with staying on the path of something. They get distracted, they neglect themselves because they're always looking at things outside of themselves, and they just get sucked into the world around them. So it's very important that you have this goal in mind, a strong desire to achieve this goal, and you have ways to quiet down the voice in your head and not get sucked into all of that garbage and the noise out there. The best cure for this, in my experience, is meditation. Now, meditation has been a big part of my life now for a while, and therefore it's a big part of my program, since my program is really just an extension of me and how I help my clients. It's very important for them to use some amount of meditation because it allows you to be consistent and focused on what you want and not distracted with noise and stress and anxieties that people have today. It's also going to help you be relaxed in the process of building up your body as well. So the second roadblock that gets in the way is that skinny guys are often weak physically. And I don't just mean in terms of lacking muscle mass, but usually they are in worse health. That's why they're even skinny in the first place. In my experience, they're much more prone to health issues, like I was explaining earlier with the skin issues and hair loss and low energy and even feeling nauseous when they eat and brain fog and fatigue. And they even have more difficulty focusing. It's also linked to being skinny. Third thing that can get in the way is a lack of appetite. Often even nausea. Some very skinny guys that I work with, they get very nauseous and they just don't have a strong desire to eat food and they're very inconsistent with it. And this can also come from poor physical health. So you need to know what you're doing to be able to solve those three common roadblocks. Now, the last big mistake that people make is not following the correct step-by-step process. Trying to figure it all out on your own, following random advice that you see on TikToks or Reels, watching random Instagram videos, wasting time, even wasting years of your life spinning the wheels and going nowhere, not making any meaningful progress. As you've seen in this video, there are some details that you need to get right if you want to transform your body, and it's simple in practice what you have to do when you know exactly what you need to do, when you have the right sources, when you have everything that you need. But there are a lot of details that you have to get right, and that is the key to getting those improvements impressive transformations like the one that you probably want. So you want to get expert advice to make this transformation and to make it happen as fast as possible with long-lasting results, to build that lean mass, but also keep it for the rest of your life. But also to keep your good health for a long time as well, not just in how you look in your body, but how you feel, your energy levels, your vitality, your ability to focus, your mental clarity as well. So if you want my help implementing this system, if you want me and my team to walk you through the step-by-step process, I'll leave a link down below. But only do this if you're serious about gaining this weight, if you really want to change your body, to build your body up, remove those poisons from your organs, from your body, and you really have to want to not be that skinny guy anymore. You need to have a strong desire to change, and that's where you can get a really good transformation and do what it takes to succeed. Only check out the link down below if you're really serious about this transformation. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.